Here's the thing, you've been emotionally manipulated. Your thoughts have been contorted. You've been played, really. And in the next couple of minutes, I'm going to try to get you to see it. If I were to tell you that I in no way condone, in fact, I disapprove of, a child's diet consisting of nothing but pure candy 24/7, would you then accuse me of hating the child? What if I were to tell you that I could in no way approve or rubber stamp the intravenous drug usage of hundreds of runaway teenagers in the city of New York? Would you then knee-jerk accuse me of hating homeless runaway teenagers? Let me take it a step further. If you were to witness me stop or impede my young, energetic, naive puppy from continuously running into oncoming traffic, despite the fact that when doing it, the puppy seemed to be having a great time, would your first instinct be to accuse me of hating said puppy? I would assume that for the vast majority of reasonable people, the answer to all three questions or scenarios would be, of course not. And the reason for this would be clear to most people. The intention behind my withholding of approval in all these scenarios is not because I hate. In all these cases, my withholding of approval, or in some cases, my attempting to stop behavior, is not out of hate at all. No, just the opposite. It's out of love and concern. In fact, anybody who has ever known the corrective words of a loving parent knows that not all withholding of approval comes with ill will, spite, or anger, malice. It's because your parent has some foresight and loves you. For example, it's out of love, not hate, that a father denies his son the full-throated support for his destructive decisions. I was a teenage boy myself and made some less than stellar decisions. And my dad loved me despite the fact that I didn't receive pats on the back for them. Okay, enough condescension. These are universally understood concepts. Love is a multifaceted thing. It's a three-dimensional thing. It involves nuance and circumstance and context. Sometimes it's the loving embrace of an unconditional mother's love, but sometimes still it's the disapproving gaze of a father, still out of love. Real love, true love, doesn't enable self-destruction, doesn't give license to self-indulgence. It's not love. What that is a lack of moral character. It's a shortcoming of moral courage. It's the laissez-faire laziness of let come what be liberalism, but it's not love. And when you remove yourself from the moment, you consider the entirety of one's timeline. If you think of somebody's life in its holistic sense, enabling self-indulgence is not love. It's cruel, actually. The secular extremists of today, who in many cases are the formers and shapers of ideas, unfortunately, have convinced you that withholding approval for something equals hatred. But you see, that's not true. And you know it's not true. Today, if you don't rubber stamp the fickle Johnny-come-lately, emotionally indulgent, secular extremist notions of human behavior, then they're going to maliciously tag you with the one-size-fits-all label of hater. What this is slander, and it's slander in its most vindictive form because the accusers in the secular scarlet letter crusade, they don't even really believe the charges that they're leveling against mainly Christians and conservatives. In fact, 90% of the time, they know that the charges aren't true. They level these baseless rhetorical attacks because they found that they're effective in stifling good-hearted, good-intended opposition to their poisonous ideology, their poisonous ideas about how to govern your life, both on the macro and the micro level. For example, to oppose divorce as the default setting when one's marriage hits turbulence, which all marriages do, that doesn't mean that you hate the divorcee, who heroically gets up and raises children all by herself, suggesting that divorce be a last resort and instead encouraging people to fight for their marriage through the valleys. That ideal, even though sometimes it's impossible to meet, encourages people to keep the nucleus of the family together. To oppose adultery, for example, doesn't mean that you hate the men and women who, in a moment of short-sighted weakness that we're all vulnerable to, betrayed the commitment of their vows. Perhaps you don't condone adultery because you want to spare individuals the consequences, the very painful consequences, the pain of shattered trust, broken families, weakened fatherhood. That in no way means that you hate the person who committed adultery. It means you care enough to speak wisdom in a storm of momentary weakness that every single person is vulnerable to. Not rubber stamping that decision, that doesn't mean that you hate the person. It means that you love the person. And yes, it doesn't mean you hate individuals with very real attraction to members of their own sex, just because you can't condone the decision to act upon that. Desiring to spare a person a life that burns from both ends, leaving them lonely and hollowed out, eventually aged and used up in a lifestyle that venerates youth and variety. To never see them know procreation or gender refinement. To see them spared the physical toils, the health risks, the emotional pain and turmoil. Giving one pause at the front end of such decisions is not hate. It's not hate at all. It's just the opposite. When secular extremists try to distort your thinking and convince you that all opposition to self-destructive choices are hate, step back and look beyond that momentary emotional manipulation that's taking place. Real love, real loyalty, that's much bigger than cheap and baby pool shallow secular extremist redefinitions. Love is a deep-rooted concern for someone, then, now, forever, a concern for their whole being. It's caring for them, mind, body, and soul. Love takes the hand and steers away from pain. It scolds sometimes when it wants to move towards the flame. It guides with wisdom, patience, forgiveness. I would say beware of people who are given the green light on every momentary whim you might have. I don't think those people love you at all. More often than not, they're trying to use that recklessness to further some personal goal. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's a worldview, sometimes they're molding the masses to undermine something. And it's usually not your benefit that they're thinking about. Real love, that's found in God's Word. If you want to know it, that's where you start. Thanks for listening.